All right, put on your broadcast voice, Yogi. Here we go. You're a pro at this. I'm just a lonely writer with a podcast because everybody has one. But here we are in the southeast corner of Husky Stadium after day 11 of fall camp. We're doing a dual podcast broadcast. I'm just trying to rhyme here. It's not going well. Husky Headlines podcast, the Life Without Limits podcast. He's Yogi Roth. I'm Adam Jude at the Seattle Times. Let's have some fun with this, Yogi. What's up, man?
Yeah, dude, I'm fired up. I've been going around the Pac-12 footprint and at each place trying to do a pod, something unique. Did one with Ashley Adamson at Cal. Did one with Mike Molinari, our producer. The Pac-12 Network's after SC. He produced the Stanford SC game and tells his epic story being in the TV truck when that upset in 2007's happening.
Oh, okay.
And then here with you, I've been thinking about it, and the universe just put us here in the southeast corner and dueling podcasts. So subscribe, rate, and review to yours. And if you're into it, check out Life Without Limits as well.
Do it. And check out the movie, too, right? We got to see that. Went to a special screening with my wife. Well, it's been a couple years now already, but awesome adventure, you and your pops. Really fun, cool story. So, folks, if you haven't seen that, Life Without Limits, awesome. Available on Apple, iTunes, right? All that good spot
it's
online.
Everywhere. Yeah,
nice.
Check it out. And Life in a Walk, thanks for coming.
Life in a Walk, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It was a blast. And the Pac-12 footprint has helped me a ton. Which is cool. I think a lot of broadcasters, you have your job and your teams that you go cover. You don't really connect the communities, but the Pac-12 Networks, I think, really does that. I saw that with Life in a Walk. Everybody from Salt Lake City to Seattle and all the stops in between, we do screenings and I would call games as you and your wife came to one. So yeah, man, let's roll. I'm ready.
This is your first Husky practice of the year. Like you said, you've been doing the tour around. What jumps out after 2 full hours of a full padded practice here in Husky Stadium?
Well, I'd be curious if you would agree. The biggest thing that jumped out to me was how much they enjoyed competing. I went from individual to when they take a unified knee at the end and all the stuff in between. And practice is not easy. Training camp is not easy. The middle of training camp is definitely not easy.
Especially day 11 here, where it feels like the dog days for us, and I can only imagine what it feels like for the guys out there.
Right. Your full pads. It's, mid-afternoon practice. It's hot outside. I thought that they enjoyed it as much as any team, as I've seen in a while, enjoy practice. And that, to me, speaks to one thing, which is competitive depth. Because when you don't have a position, you have to compete for a position. Whether you are the starting free safety, Taylor Rapp, you know how talented that position group is. You got to bring it every day. And I think that's this team. I don't know if you'd agree, but in my 2-hour snippet of this program, that's the biggest thing that jumped out.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty good synopsis. And that speaks to the larger point of the culture that Chris Peterson has developed here going into year 5. I think back to 2014, 2015 when he was trying to establish that, and he was actually pretty open through that whole process, how awkward it was, how difficult it was at times. And you could see it on Saturdays too when they went 8-6 in 2014, when a lot of people thought that they had talent to win more than 8 games that year. Obviously some of the roller coaster of, again, being a first-year coach, trying to do things your way, which in this case was a lot different than the way things had been done before. So, again, you're going to get that a lot in your first year. But then I think back to 2015, Jake Browning, all these Myles Gaskin, Trey Adams, all these true freshmen playing. But it's been a heck of a journey for these guys. And you think about, again, just the larger point of the culture of where everything matters. There's no detail that's too small for these guys in virtually everything they do. And we see that on practice field, too, where middle of practice, they do some of these individual drills where I'm curious to hear kind of your point on this, where to me, these guys are teaching more than places before that I've seen. And like the nuance here, like I said, everything matters and they don't really miss much. If your hand is 1 inch too far to the left, they're going to correct it in the blocking drills and get that right away.
Yeah, I think there's layers of development with programs. When you come in, you have to establish the way in which you operate. And that's a lot. I think this program, and even if you look at another first-year head coach, you talked about 2014, Chip Kelly. Yeah. Biggest thing that jumps out when I'm at his practices, and you cover the Ducks, is the great teaching that goes on from the position coaches. Here I'm in the end zone, beginning of practice, and I'm watching outside backers, rush edge players, just go against the offensive line, and here's Pete Kwiatkowski talking about hand placement. And then Coach Peterson runs over, and he's talking about where to put your feet. I mean, you're right, the littlest things, and I think there's a beauty to that, and I think you got to look at the learners there. There's an old coaching adage that Coach Carroll just across the street would say, you got to learn your learner. And I think that this program has a real pulse on it because you look at how they recruit and how they rarely lose guys.
Right.
So they get to know them really well of the type of consumers of content they are and consumers of knowledge. And that jumps out, man. I mean, the functional football intelligence of this program is really evident when you're watching them compete in team-type specific situations. And I'm glad we agree on that because I was going to roll with that theme no matter what all season long, so that's good.
I want to jump to, speaking of competitive depth, and you talked about Taylor Rapp, but I kind of feel like a broken record just 11 days into camp here, just how good this secondary is. I was telling you earlier, I think it compares favorably with the 2016 group. Featured Budda Baker, Sidney Jones, Kevin King, all second-round NFL draft picks. Some of these guys are a little bit younger, but I think top to bottom, this secondary has a chance to be as good, if maybe not even better, than maybe that unit from a couple years ago. This is 2-hour practice. I'm not asking you to make that leap, but do you like what you see in these first couple hours?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do these short little Twitter videos, and in mine, on this team, I call it the best secondary in the country, top to bottom. And I'd be hard-pressed, I think anybody would be hard-pressed to find 1 through 11, 1 through 12 of guys that could legitimately start today. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the truth. Elijah Moldenwood started every school in the conference, and I'd argue the country, outside of maybe 2 or 3 that are just elite at the safety spots with some seniors there. And not a lot of programs have that. And he's not in that starting unit right now. I mean, and I'd say the same thing about a lot of the corners. So I think that the selflessness of this program is evident when you look at how that group competes. And why do they do it? Well, you don't have to look very far. When Jimmy Lake became the official defensive coordinator, calling the defense, earlier this year, and Pete Kwiatkowski was like, yeah, great. If it's going to make our team better, we're not going to lose them. That trickles down.
Who does that?
In this era of college football, no one does that. Right. And it's not like Pete's one of the hottest names in the country. He could have gone anywhere. Right. So to me, that element is so unique. I've never seen anything like that in all of college football. We've seen it when guys, trade spots on the same staff, but it's usually because they don't do well, or the unit doesn't do well, or they need different energy. Not here. So I'd agree with you. I think they're special, the way that they talk, the way they communicate, the way they practice, how fast, how long they are. I'm watching their individual drill, and I'm like, damn, they're good. And Utah, I was just there yesterday. They're starting 3 in the secondary, and you could say the 5 are big time. But they don't have 7 more guys, 6 more guys. Right. So, yeah, man, I totally agree.
I don't know if I owe you an apology. I might. We sat here a year ago. I caught up with you after your tour here, and you were gushing over Savon Ahmed. I think all of us were at the time, our first chance to really see him. And as the airlines go by here in the Southwest Quarter, this is what you get from an open-air podcast. We're in the setting here, the greatest setting, as they would say.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a ton of Savon Ahmed, and for that matter, Myles Gaskin here, a week and a half into fall camp. By design, we don't need to see a ton of those guys. We know what they can do. They're trying to keep them fresh. I think as much as anything, as an aside here, that's with Myles Gaskin, I think Chris Peterson, Keith Bonifa, the running backs coach, they've been really, really deliberate about how they use him the past 3 years. He's only averaged 17 carries per game in his career, almost on point every year, 16, 17 carries. It's kept him fresh at the end of the year. He's never missed a game. Durability is not a question about Myles Gaskin. And I think the same thing with Savon Ahmed. Even a guy who may not get 10 touches a game still can be one of those guys who was that explosive, dynamic playmaker this offense was missing at times last year. I guess less about what you saw maybe here today, speak more to where he can fit maybe more in the offense and what his potential is coming into year 2.
I think one of my favorite things to do is go to a football practice with someone who isn't doing your job or my job. They just come out to practice. And you just ask them, hey, like, anybody stand out to you?
Yeah.
And I think anybody, if we brought our friends who aren't fans of college football or nerds like we are in it, they would say, 26? Like, he just looks different.
Right.
When he touches the ball, when he puts his foot in the ground, when he bursts, when he takes off, when he lines up, when he moves. and I'm sure it's when he talks. He's just got a different side to him. I remember him in recruiting and reading about him and just seeing him, even when he makes his commitment and when he does his little videos. You're like, God, this guy's he's different. He's the OKG that Chris Peterson always talks about, and among all the guys he's recruited, he's probably the biggest difference maker on offense that he's ever had. So I think his role will increase, and I think this team, similar to I think some teams in this conference. I referenced Utah because I was just there. Maybe not a bona fide rock star on offense where you're a first round pick,
right?
N'Keal Harry, you're not Bryce Love,
right?
But you got a lot of talent. I think that's this team on offense where, okay, maybe you're not saying let me double cover anybody,
right,
but you're going to get beat by guys. They're good enough to beat you, and some are good enough to be special. And I think the Myles Gaskin combination, personnel groupings, the fun that Bush Hamden's going to be able to have with this group, putting guys in different spots, taking his NFL background a little bit, which is a matchup league,
right,
and saying, okay, what do we like? Where can Savon Ahmed beat you? Because he could probably beat anybody on a majority of teams when he's put in an isolation type of position.
I stick with the offense a little bit. That was obviously the shortcoming for this team last year, particularly on the edge. They were so beat up, too. I think people tend to forget Chico McClatcher out with a broken ankle and torn ACL. Quentin Bounds torn ACL for the second time in his career. Dante Pettis by the end of the year didn't really play in the Apple Cup, didn't really play 2 snaps in the Fiesta Bowl. And so I think people tend to forget that when they want to knock Jake Browning down a peg and criticize him a little bit. And yet some of that is fair. Browning is taking that on himself to say, he's jumped out of the pocket too quickly, too often, got himself in tough positions. As I theorized to him a couple weeks ago when we sat down, he stopped trusting his reads, which was, to me, was always his strength as a young quarterback. Was he knew what he was looking for, and when he saw it, he went with it immediately. He never second-guessed himself, just had those, natural instincts that you could speak better to this than I would, but it just seems really rare out of a really young quarterback, which is why he was a starter as a true freshman. But I think him getting back maybe more to that is, as much anything, what this offense needs. A bunch of dudes walking by here. But when you break down the offense and some of the breakdowns from last year and the potential for that rebound this year, I guess what does that look like in your mind?
Yeah, well, I go back with Jake Browning to probably my favorite story of him is when he's in high school and he goes to Boise State's camp, and he's there so late at night studying film, learning about the team, that Coach Peterson's like, hey man, you gotta go back to the dorm. You gotta shut it down now. And I say that because it marries up when he comes in mid-year as a freshman with Jadon Mickens, and Jadon Mickens is like, man, this guy's different because he's working out from the minute he's here in January, thrown in the indoor, studying film. Like, well, this guy's different. And I think as you watch him throughout his career, he's just a little different in that regard. He's not a huge social media guy. He's not a brand guy. He's a ball guy, and he's funny, sneaky funny. I think he's obviously really intellectual. And now he's in his last hurrah. And college football, every senior says it, and it's a broken record, but oh my gosh, it went by so fast. So here he is now as a senior. If we looked at this team on paper, we would have said his senior year, look out, right? He comes in that class with Chris Peterson, Miles, Trey Adams, as you referenced, that vaunted class where a lot of young guys are playing. Keelan McGarry's a redshirt freshman playing that year. Now here we are 4 years later. I think he's going to have the ability to be surgical. I think he's going to have the ability to manipulate defenses with his eyes, and he's going to have to. Did it today in practice. I think he's going to have to throw guys open. He's going to have to be insanely accurate. Front shoulder throws, finding spots, tight ends, numbers and lower. All those things, I don't think for Jake are too much. I think that's a standard. If Jake misses high and I'm calling the game, I'm like, he doesn't miss there.
Right.
Whereas if I was talking about Jake Haener or a younger quarterback or a more inexperienced quarterback, the correction would be next time he throws that, you want to make it numbers or lower.
Right.
He's not there. He's so far beyond that. So I think it's going to be really fun to watch him with Bush again, with Coach Pete, take this thing to another level because, there's a great video on YouTube. Check it out. It's called Fear, and it's by Stephen King. he has all these NFL players in it, and it's beautifully done, and it's all about the fear defenders striking you, Lawrence Taylor's, crazy defensive ends, and then halfway through the video it flips and it goes, but there's this other side of fear, man, and they talk about Peyton Manning at the line of scrimmage, and Tom Brady and Drew Brees, and that's what Jake Browning needs to be. When he gets to that line of scrimmage, there should be such a confidence. Oh, I have such command. I know exactly what defense is. Oh, by the way, much more simplified than they've been in the past. And you can get them simpler with your formations and personnel groupings and guys like Savon Ahmed moving them around, which is what Bush Ham is going to be an expert in and is an expert in. Now, all of a sudden, look out. And that's where I expect him to be elite. He should be just driving the keys to the car of this offense, as well as, or better than, any quarterback under Chris Peterson, which would include, of course, Kellen Moore.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up Bush. There was a moment in practice today. Bush Hamden, obviously first year back, spent last year with the Atlanta Falcons, working with Matt Ryan there, working under Steve Sarkisian too. And I feel like Bush's main goal here is to come in, I don't want to say antagonize Jake Browning, but he's here to challenge him. And I've seen that in a way that I haven't seen the last couple of years. And granted, we're shut out of practice after a week and a half of fall camp and spring ball. But I just feel like that it's a kind of change where most senior quarterbacks who are kind of set in their ways and have had it one way, have had it pretty good, they might balk at that kind of change. I feel like this is something Jake Browning is really embracing, a new set of eyeballs to tell him, no, you got to look at it this way a little bit, or you forgot this whatever the case may be. But there was a moment in practice today where 4th down, Browning threw to a spot he thought the receiver was supposed to come back. Nobody was there. Turnover on downs. There's just it looked like a terrible throw. Nobody was there, and I think Jake thought it was probably on the receiver running the wrong route. Bush immediately is pointing at Jake, brings him over for a discussion, and it was clear that there was some miscommunication there. Even if it was maybe the receiver's fault, that's on the senior quarterback there to make sure the communication is on point, and the quarterback, that's his responsibility there. So that was something where, for a guy who's in tune, I think as any college quarterback maybe has ever been, that's a big statement, I get it, but Jake Browning's the guy who's sitting in on coaches' meetings. He's got unofficial veto power, I think, on particular plays. He's that dialed in. We know that. But for me to see Bush Hamden kind of challenge in that way, it wasn't an angry sort of thing, but it was more just like Bush is shaking his head. He gets him over there. This is what you did wrong here. Why didn't you do this, that? I think that's exactly what Jake Browning needs at this stage in his career, even for a guy who's as dialed in as anyone maybe has ever been.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I'd be curious if you'd agree with this. I think this program is based in like a growth mindset approach, and by that, you're constantly seeking and uncovering areas to evolve, and the great ones want to be challenged. I'm telling you, whether I'll never forget it, you referenced Sark when he went to the Raiders and was like maybe 20-some-year-old, early 30s quarterback coach. His first meeting was Rich Gannon, who I think was like 38 or 40. And he's like, he wanted to be challenged, right? The great ones, you as a writer, you want to be challenged. Me as a broadcaster, pats on the back are nice, but they don't do anything, right? Thanks. Let's keep it moving. And in this era, Jake Browning's going to get as many pats on the back every weekend from 60-plus thousand fans just in this stadium alone. He doesn't need any more of those. What do you need? You need to get challenged. You need to strain. You need to grow. You need to evolve. And I think that's the program. I think that's why Chris Peterson brings speakers in for Real Life Wednesdays. I think it's why he's constantly hammering home that, it's not just about football. His entire plan around that. And I think for Jake, it's not just running the play that's called. It's having the command of the line of scrimmage. It's making sure if a guy is misaligned, you make the adjustment. It's understanding, nuances of a defense and rotations. And there's so much to the game. I mean, I remember over the summer at the Elite 11, I was interviewing guys in the NFL that have been around forever, quarterbacks that have played forever. And when they talked about the game, they're like, football is something where there's always something to learn, right? And this era is great because every player from your kid's age to Jake Browning and beyond can go online and find everything. Right. You can watch Tom Brady and how he trains, how he thinks on Facebook Watch, right? And I think the great ones have the growth mindset of Jake could easily be like, I've arrived.
Right.
That's a 7-win team in this year, the way they're set up. So, and I think it starts from their strength and conditioning program and clearly trickles its way down. So I love that, and I think Bush is going to be awesome for this team, like Jonathan was for this program. And I think when you look at Bush or Jimmy or these guys, they are going to launch out of here and run their own programs when the opportunity presents themselves.
Right.
What do you think? Do you agree? Do you think that this is like a program rooted in growth mindset or in just competing to just let's just keep being?
No, absolutely, and that goes back to the culture of guys wanting to come out here every day and get better. And you hear them say it all the time. It's one of the talking points. But even if they didn't truly believe it, at some point, if you say something enough, you do believe it. But everybody ends their interviews here, virtually every player, saying, "I just want to come out here and get better." And you can tell that's kind of the mantra of this program, and that speaks exactly to what you're talking about with the growth mindset. And that's what it is. Look, again, back to our first topic, and just getting out here in the middle of August, and there's hazy smoke in the air, and it's hot, and guys are starting to push and shove each other. The dog days, all that stuff. They still have that focus of, hey, we need to get better at this specific drill, or let's focus on this thing to get better at today. Tevis Bartlett talks about it a lot. Like, I just want to come out here. If there's one thing, typically he comes out to practice, there's one thing he wants to work on that day and get better at because he knows he needs to do that, or it's just one little thing. So you hear it a lot, and it becomes broken record with this team. But again, I think it's talked about every day and talked about so often that becomes part of their fabric, and they truly believe that. So yeah, I think that's exactly, in a nutshell, it's growth mindset, and that's what the good ones do, right?
Yeah. So all right, so let me flip it back on you in this dueling podcast here. Question: the whole country is going to be tuned in to. Don't even call it Auburn UW.
September 1st.
SEC Pac-12.
Yeah, true.
Right? This conference needs this game just for a reputation outside of the footprint. Yeah. Everybody says 1-8 in the bowls, but in the last 5 years, Pac-12 was the second best bowl record. Nobody cares about that, clearly, or nobody pays attention to that anywhere that isn't on the West Coast time zone. So, that being said, being around this team for the first week and a half of camp, what's the vibe that you have around them at that game?
I think they've done a really good job, even going back to the spring and trying to talk to guys about this, because this is, I don't even think arguably, I think it is the biggest opener in UW history. And when you put in the context of where this team is, the expectations, what they can be, or we think they can be, and Jake Browning's legacy, Myles Gaskin, Chris Peterson in year 5, it's all set up. It's all set up for this. And yet, again, when you talk to these guys, I asked one of the offensive linemen today, because all I hear about whenever Auburn comes up is their defensive line and how big, how awesome, how the monsters they have there that are going to be surefire first-round NFL draft picks. And all I hear about is that's what this game is going to come down to, is whether Trey Adams is healthy and UW's offensive line can give Jake Browning enough time to hold back that vaunted Auburn defensive line. And maybe it's that simple. But these guys, when I talked to the offensive lineman today, it was Henry Roberts. He's like, honestly, we haven't really thought too much about that. And I believed him too. I'm sure they've watched film over the summer. They know it's coming, but it's not like they've sat down and broken these guys down yet. He said, I just need to come out here and get better. That's my mindset right now. And again, goes back to our overall theme here. But
that's hard.
I don't think it is hard when you've got, and particularly when the last few years, this time of year, Husky fan base here bemoaning a really weak, soft, non-conference schedule. There's no one big game to get everyone really excited. Yeah, people are excited about Boise State and the Chris Peterson return 3 years ago, but that was, tempered expectations because the program here was still so young. Jake Browning was a true freshman starter, and, you sort of knew you had lower expectations because of that. Expectations cannot be higher now. So, I think the mindset, the approach from a coaching standpoint, from a program standpoint, exactly what you want when you're in it. You're not going to get overwhelmed by it. These guys are taking it day by day, and I hate to sound like coach speak here and to sound like them, because it's my job to sort of hype these things up, right? This is the biggest game ever. But no, you can't even get these guys to really say much about it, because I think it's probably true that they haven't spent a whole lot of time on it, and if they do, they're going to dwell on it, they're going to psych themselves out. So going back to your point, I think we all know, I think they know how big it is. If they go lay an egg in Atlanta, it's not going to derail their season. It might derail the whole Pac-12. I mean, that might be a little hyperbole and overstated, but that's how big this is, and that's going to be the perception, at least back east, about this game. And again, and then on the flip side, though, if the Huskies go They put on a great performance. Oh my gosh, here they go. They're one of the best teams in the country, going down to SEC country on the road, essentially, in that environment. Everything is in front of them at that point, and what a season this could be.
Yeah, I think that the last 2 years and experiences are just huge for them.
Yep.
You know, you look at obviously the Bama game, which they played really well in outside of like 2 plays kind of break that game
People
open.
tend to, forget like how close that was.
Even the Penn State game. I mean, and the thing about the Bama game that I think is often not recognized is the defense was fine.
Yeah.
Like, they had 1 missed tackle, which led to a house call.
Yeah.
And it's a pick 6, I think, and it's a different game.
That's it.
So I think that they're going to handle the physical side of it, no problem. I think you look at the Penn State game last year, and nobody talks about the key players they had out and then the resiliency they had to come back. So I'm not worried about them laying an egg. I'm excited to see it. I think it's really hard to predict teams week 1, who they are on offense, because you just go against your defense the whole time.
Yeah.
You haven't really found a rhythm. So that's why I think this is going to be a great game.
Yep.
2 really unique defensive teams. Front 7 of Auburn's really elite. Obviously UW, and the back end is special. I think you like the front 7. Not sure who's gifted out of that group yet, but they're talented enough to compete at that level. So, Paul, man, I wish it was around the corner, but there is a ton at stake. Reputation for the fans that don't know squat or do not care or do not listen and choose to not listen. Even other people on television who choose to not really watch the games, only watch highlights, to recognize the diversity of play, which is on the West Coast.
Right.
But they got to win to make some real noise.
You get some sense maybe this offseason, after the ESPN debacle, we call it around here, but you get a sense that maybe, the East Coast, the national media, the ESPNs of the world are maybe catching on a little bit for what they know. Chris Peterson's a good coach, but do you think there's that respect yet of he's in that elite categories?
I think so. I think that he's been in that conversation when he was at Boise because he turned down so many jobs, because of the success they had. I think what happened with that is really like they realized clearly it was a dramatic mistake, from game day to calling the game to what was done on the sideline. And that was embarrassment to the craft of broadcasting, in my opinion. And I think then you're backtracking, and all of a sudden you're trying to like, hey, we love you guys, hey, because you realize that's a mistake. That's not what media is created for. Media only exists. You have a job, I have a job. Game day exists because there's a game. And the minute the game is gone, none of us have jobs in this profession, at least, in this craft, covering college football. And my point is that, and I think all of us learn this at a very young age, when you act as though you're bigger than the game slaps you down. Mm-hmm. It happens to coaches when they get let go. It happens to people when they don't play well. It happens to all of us when we get fired. It's just part of the game. So I think nobody had ill will and set out and said, hey, let's take a shot at Chris Peterson, one of the most respected guys, most winningest coach in the history of the game. But it happened, and then it was like, whoa, we didn't mean it to come out that way. It came out that way. Oh, my God, this thing blew up. And it clearly blew up in ESPN's face, and it was an embarrassment to them, but more importantly to me, an embarrassment to the game and to the craft, because that's not what we bust our tails doing to generate respect for the craft that we have, which is broadcasting and celebrating the game and telling stories and being critical when we have to be, versus just kind of being aloof,
flippant, and
yeah. So it's over, and we'll see what happens. But I do think that the paradigm will shift, because there is an element of we need to give this league more respect, because I think it's evident that it hasn't been done that way. For a team that has 9 conference games and has to play sometimes 6 of them in a row, that's just harder than any other road that exists in other conferences.
Do you like the idea, not to cut you off there, but it's been floated to where Pac-12 has talked about the idea, Larry Scott has openly talked about it, the idea of adding a non-conference game in November, like the SEC does. Alabama plays Southwest Missouri Directional State in mid-November because it's essentially a bye.
Yeah.
Is that something the Pac-12 needs to seriously consider?
I think they are, and I think that, you can't level the playing field in style of play or where you recruit from. Right. It's just different. You talk to defensive coordinators, which to me is the most important person to talk to, who've coached in different leagues, different parts of the country, and the football's just really different. So you have to find subtle ways to make it so everybody's on the same page. The big issue I have with a late non-com game, whether it's in the SEC or the Pac-12, is when we talk to the College Football Playoff Committee, where the playoff is now with 4 teams, are we all on the same page in terms of, is it the 4 best teams based on the regular season or the 4 best teams based on the projection? If it's the former, Alabama doesn't make the playoff or win the national title. If it's the latter, then Alabama should really just be in it every year if they have 1 or 2 losses. And I got major problems. Again, I go back to respecting the game. I've never been around a sport from being 6 years old to 36 years old where if you lose your last game, you get a chance to win a title in a single elimination type of sport, which is basically college football. I don't like it when you can carry seasons over to the next season, and I think we just need some clarity around that. So if there's no clarity around that, and Alabama and Ohio State teams are going to get in or going to get higher rankings based on their projections, even if they don't win their conference or win their final game of the regular season, then we need to have a week 11 game. So then we could get our teams in this Pac-12 conference the healthiest to make their final push.
All right, we're getting off track a little bit, but I want to play with this trope a little bit. If you are, let's say, name the new college football commissioner, Yogi Roth, introduce college football commissioner. What's your first point of business? What's your first action?
I think the first thing I would do, well, there's a lot of things actually, but I always go back to why this game is played. One, for the student athletes. I think the placement of student athletes post-career, I'd organize something around there. I'd organize health insurance for life. I was a guy who broke my neck playing. If I didn't have a job, what would have happened regarding the insurance of that? I think we talk about NFL players who are broke, divorced, on drugs, like the stat that is always thrown out when their career ends. Well, college athletes, they just don't have any money, but they still go through the same depression, the same elements. I got a podcast coming up with Dr. Michael Gervais of the Seattle Seahawks, and we talk about depression and anxiety in college football and sports in general. It's gaining. So I'd start there, and then I'd go to the fans, and I would change bowls immediately. I would allow fans to vote on bowls and give fans matchups they want. I do not like bowl agreements, because the great example is the Pac-12 and the SEC, right? I mean, a couple years ago, it was the Pac-12 and the Big Ten had an agreement where they were going to do regular season games against one another. That ended up not coming to fruition. But point being is, how great would it be last year to see, I don't know, call it, I mean, Stanford TC was a great game, but if it was Stanford LSU, right? Like, take away the top 8 teams, the top 12 teams, but the second, third, fourth team in your conference, what matchups do you want to see? Right. I mean, I'm hard-pressed to say that Indiana and Utah is on either fan base's radar.
Sure.
But if you said Utah got to play a team like, I don't know, Ole Miss, or got to play a team like Wisconsin, or whatever it is, I would go there, because I think we're seeing lack of attendance, of course, in bowl games. And I love college football, but there's 42 bowl games. I don't care about all of them, because you watch them because you love the game, you love the kids.
And they're on,
But give me something so it can generate the buzz. So I would start with those
idea.
2 things.
I like that. We're getting a little off track here.
Yeah, it's good, man.
That's it.
Sun's setting. It's a little hazy.
I wanted to ask you, you just came from Utah. Huskies going to Salt Lake City, week 3, Pac-12 opener. To me, is the sneaky game on the Husky schedule that I think a lot of people are overlooking and shouldn't be overlooking, but obviously everyone's focused on September 1st in Auburn, going to Atlanta and all that. Huskies have to go to Oregon, got Stanford coming here in November. But to me, everyone sleeps on Utah every year, but going there, playing in that environment is maybe the most underrated spot in the Pac-12. And to me, I've got that one circled for the Huskies as, man, no matter what happens September 1st, if you can't go take care of business, be competitive in Salt Lake City on mid-September, maybe we're looking at this season a little bit differently.
Well, I mean, if UW wins week 1, circle College Game Day being in Salt Lake City.
You go. Again, that was the same way 2 years ago.
It's a big deal. They're really good. I think Utah is past the surprising people phase. You look at, they had 14 votes in the Pac-12 South this year. People think that they got a chance to win it. They're who I would pick in the preseason, and then now even seeing a lot of the teams in the South through training camp, I'd still go with Utah. I think it's gonna be an awesome game. You might see it twice this year. You might see it again in the Pac-12 title game. I love it. I think it's exactly how it should be. And, I like some of these early season games. You got SC Stanford week 2, this one week 3. And I think they're big stages, and the country should know kind of what's going on there. Utah, I'll be there. Their opener on a Thursday night against Weber State. You know, it's not like their first 2 weeks are dramatically difficult, not as hard as UW's, I would say. And I'm calling UW here week 2, so it'll be fun to kind of be the sandwich game prior to that big one in Salt Lake City. So
North Dakota.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be a great game. You know, it'll be 2 physical teams. Hopefully 2 teams will be healthy. You know, UW coming off a tough one, obviously in the opener, will get to play North Dakota, which clearly they should do well in. But man, yeah, it's got physicality, title game, epic atmosphere. I don't know. Did they set the time of that game yet?
I don't think so.
Yeah, probably not.
No,
I mean, imagine.
I don't think so.
UW fans don't want that at 5 o'clock. I mean, if it is, that place is going to be out of control. It'll be out of control at noon, 11 a.m., 1 p.m., whatever. But it's a very special place. And it'll be the 2 best secondaries, I'd argue, in the Pac-12 and potentially the country playing against each other.
Wow. Good stuff. Good stuff. Should we leave it there?
Man,
we went around the horn. We went all over the place. That was good.
Through fire, we talked college football. Let's go, man. Enough talking, right? I want to go to the game.
You've been talking all day. You're a popular guy. This is good. Hopefully this is a popular podcast.
I hope so, man.
2 popular podcasts. This was good. Let's do it again before you come back for Notre Dame.
I love it. All right, man. Well, let's stay in touch. Thanks for listening to Adam Jude and his podcast.
And Yogi, Life Without Limits. 5-star rating, people. 5 stars only. If you're not going to put 5 stars, just don't bother. Thank you.
Love it.
All right. Giddy up.